Hello, and welcome to our condensed history of Japan. In this episode, we will attempt to squeeze in about 1,500 years of Japanese history. So again, this is one of those things, I'm sorry if this is something you're super into, as this will probably not do the topic total justice, but we're going to try the best we can. Today, the main focus of our lesson is Japanese imperialism and how they became the way we know them today. But first, let's review what was going on in Japan before the 1800s. Ancient Japan was a territory divided by clans that borrowed ideas from China, like Buddhism, and the concept of emperors ruling over a kingdom, their writing style, and their architecture. But don't be confused though, they do have a very distinct and different culture than China. By the mid-11th century, Japanese feudalism began. This will be a very similar structure to what is going on in Europe at the same time. There is an emperor at the top of the social structure that does not have much power. Just like in Europe, they will mostly be ruled over by regional nobles, and in Japan, those nobles are called daimyo. The daimyo were then served by local warriors called samurais, which can be compared to knights in Europe. And then, of course, at the bottom, you have the peasant workers who do all of the work and basically carry the society. So again, very similar to European feudalism. From 1192 to 1867, Japan was ruled by a military dictator called a shogun. So the emperor was usually more of a cultural figurehead that carried on traditions and held symbolic power, while the shogun was the one leading the military and really calling all of the shots. From 1560 to 1600, Japan was united under one really powerful shogun, a man named Tokugawa. Tokugawa unites Japan and creates a strong line of succession called the Tokugawa shogunate that will rule Japan until 1867. Okay, so now you know the background of what politics looked like in Japan before the 1800s. They basically had very little change to their structure for close to 600 years. Now let's talk about Europe. The first Europeans to really travel to Japan will come in the mid-1500s. In the beginning, the Japanese were interested in trading with Europe because they were fascinated by their military structures and new technologies they brought with them. And the Japanese had never seen these types of technologies before. But with the Europeans will come Christianity. And the Japanese state did not appreciate the Christian missionaries trying to convert their people to this outside religion that gave the state less control. So, they banned Christianity in Japan in 1619. Eventually, Japan decides that they need to protect their people from European influences, and the Tokugawa shogunate bans all foreign merchants and missionaries. By 1639, Japan had decided that, like their neighbor China, they too should adopt an isolationist policy toward these Western intruders. This era of Japanese isolation will last for the next 200 years. During this era of isolation, the Japanese did leave one port open for outside trading, but they only allowed the Dutch and Chinese to trade there. So what made the Dutch different than the rest of Europe? Well, the main thing was that the Dutch were there specifically for trade purposes. They were not there to spread Christianity, and they only offered information about the West when rulers asked them to. So what develops from this are what the Japanese will call Dutch studies. In these Dutch studies, the Japanese learned about some of the new scientific and industrial technologies in Europe. So things like the steamboat, the railroad. From 1640 to 1853, Japan is able to maintain their isolationist policies, while the rest of Asia becomes imperialized by Western powers. In the early 1800s, Britain, France, Russia, and the USA try to negotiate trade rights in Japan, and the Japanese will repeatedly refuse Western trade. Knock knock, guess what? America's here. In 1853, U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry arrived in Tokyo Harbor with 4 well-armed steamships and demanded that the Japanese trade with the U.S. So this is the original Matthew Perry, not the guy from Friends. Perry basically tells the Japanese that they can either trade with the U.S. or the U.S. will be back to confront them in 4 months. There's no official declaration saying that they would use force to make Japan trade with them, but it's implied. Geez, thanks, America. So, the Japanese think it over and decide they are too outmatched by U.S. naval ships. Remember, the U.S. was industrialized by this point, and Japan was not. So just imagine how terrifying these new U.S. ships must have looked to them. So when Matthew Perry returns in 1854, Japan agrees to the Treaty of Kanagawa, which opens 2 ports to American merchants. You may be thinking to yourself, hey, that's not so bad. It's only 2 ports. But after the U.S. opened the door to Japanese trade in 1854, this opens the door for all of the other Western powers as well. They were like, hey, if we can just show up and threaten them, then we can trade too. So by 1860, just 4 years after the Americans came, the English, French, Dutch, Russians, and the U.S. will have unequal trade treaties and extraterritorial rights in Japan. These unequal trade treaties mostly meant that they got to set prices for any goods they were buying from Japan, which means that Japanese people didn't make much money off of this trade. But one of the worst things imposed on them were extraterritorial rights, which basically means that while these foreigners are in Japan, they do not have to follow the laws of Japan, but rather whatever the laws are in their own country. So, Japanese police really couldn't do anything to law-breaking foreigners other than send them to their own countrymen to be punished, which of course meant most of the time, nothing would happen to them. So now, Japan is in a pickle. How do they get these foreigners out of their country when the foreigners are bigger and have better technology than them? The Japanese knew if it came to a fight, they would lose. Well, some big changes are on the horizon for Japan. They started to turn on their shogun because he was the person who signed those unequal treaties. So now Japan is afraid they will end up as powerless as China is. In 1867, the Tokugawa shogun stepped down, which brought an end to 600 years of military dictatorships in Japan. But if you remember, Japan had always had an emperor and a dictator in power at the same time. So the emperor, a guy named Matsuhito, takes control of the government and gives himself the new title of Meiji, or the Enlightened Rule. I mean, look at the picture of him on the screen. Can you guess what he chooses to do? The Meiji emperor realized the best way to get the West out of Japan was to modernize Japan. If they had all of the same technology as the West, then they couldn't push Japan around anymore. So Japan sends diplomats to Europe and America to study Western ways and adapt them to Japan. Here are a few examples of ideas that Japan will incorporate. The first is that they will base their constitution and parliament model off of Germany. So now, Japan went from being run by a dictatorship/emperor to having a clear constitution and representation in their government. They also realized they needed to be able to make their own goods and not have to rely on the West to make things for them. So, Japan built modern factories. They also start to improve their architecture by incorporating steel to make things like bridges and tall buildings. They also developed their own railroad lines and steamships. Japan builds themselves a modern military by modeling their army after the Germans and their navy after the British. The Japanese officials also make many educational reforms. Now they will use models from Germany, America, and France to institute a compulsory education program. You even start to see cultural changes occurring along with the technology changes. Western fashion begins to become popular in Japan. I think this painting is so interesting. It's a great example of how cultures take ideas from each other while still keeping their own identity. You see the traditional Japanese cherry blossoms and the artistic style in the painting, while it shows its Western influence in their dress. The ladies look like they just stepped out of Edwardian England. The modernization that Japan does during the Meiji era will transform Japan into the most industrial and militarized nation in Asia. By 1900, just 40 years after they began industrializing, Japan had 7,000 miles of railroad track, thousands of factories that created profitable enterprises in tea and silk, and they also had built up a modern army and navy. they were finally able to get back their land from the invading Westerners and establish foreign relations on their terms. So by the 1890s, Japan saw itself as a modern nation with lots of factories. And if you have factories, you need a large supply of natural resources to keep them running. Japan decided they needed more raw materials. So they just started to do what the West had been doing for about 100 years now. They started looking for places in Asia to take over and imperialize. Originally, Japan wanted to take over Korea, but China had always had a claim to this land. So, the Japanese challenged China to Korea, which results in the Sino-Japanese War. Japan is so industrialized by this point that they totally destroy the Chinese army and navy. You might be wondering, China's so much bigger than Japan, and the West has been in China for almost 75 years at this point. Why didn't they industrialize like Japan did? Well, let me tell you. One of the things about the West is that they didn't like their imperialized states to gain too much knowledge, self-governance, or advancements. They basically learned their lesson from the revolutions period where they lost all their holdings in the Americas and decided that they needed to keep Japan from industrializing so they couldn't kick them out. Anyways, for their victory, Japan gains Taiwan and spheres of influence in China. I love this Japanese woodblock print. I think it does a fantastic job of explaining how the Japanese saw themselves as being totally different from the rest of Asia. On the left, you see the modernized Japanese dressed in very Western attire, and on the right, you see the conquered Chinese bowing to them in traditional garb. After Japan's victory over China, a rivalry will develop between Japan and Russia. From 1904 to 1905, Russia and Japan will be fighting over an area called Manchuria, which was under Russian control at the time. Japan instigated the fight because they wanted to extend their railways and port cities. During the war, Japan shocked the world by defeating a Western power. Like little old Japan beat Russia in this fight. I love the picture on the left here of how the world viewed the situation, before and after the war. This is what really establishes to the world that Japan is a major power, and everybody better watch out. So now, Japan is the dominant force in Asia, and Western nations will actually be calling upon Japan to keep peace and order in Asia, especially during World War I. Unfortunately, though, Japanese imperialism will continue. Basically, imperialism is one of the things that will lead to World War I, and after World War I, Europe agrees to cool it on the imperialism for a while. But Japan didn't get the memo. They weren't super involved in World War I and didn't experience firsthand the conflict imperialism created. So them going out and conquering other areas will become a focal point during World War II. All right, we made it. There is your brief lesson on the history of Japan. We will pick this up again when we talk about World War II. Thanks for watching.